Hey guys, want to make a quick video today on a very well-known passage, and that is Romans 8:28. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. In many translations, it goes something like this. It says, "And we know that God causes all things to work together for good, for those who love God and are called according to his purpose." And I want to make this video because I think a lot of times we take that verse out of context and misquote it. And, we'll quote it a lot of times if things aren't going our way. And we'll say things like, "Oh man, it's okay, brother. We know all things work for the good." And we'll say it like that. But that's not exactly what it says. And that's not exactly the context. And I'm sure many of you really like that verse. And I'm here with good news, though. I'm not here to say that that verse is, less powerful than the way that we think. I'm here to say that I think it's even more powerful than the way we usually interpret it. So like I said, we usually say things like, "Oh, we know all things work for good. Oh, you lost your job, brother? Well, God has a better job for you because all things work for good." And I'm not saying that God doesn't want us to have a good job and he doesn't want to prosper us in that area. But what I'm saying is the context of it says that he causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So the good in that verse is referring to his purpose that he has for us. And if you want to know what that purpose is, all you have to do is read the next verse, Romans 8:29, which says, "For those whom he foreknew," talking about us, "he also predestined that they might be conformed to the image of his Son, Jesus, so that he, Jesus, might be the firstborn among many brethren." So God's purpose, even from the beginning, was to make man in his image, was to have people that were like him and that he could manifest himself through on the earth so that people would know what he is like. And so what God is saying is that in the life of a believer, for those who love God and are called according to that purpose, he causes all things to work towards that purpose of conforming us to the image of his Son. And see, once we are aligned with that purpose, then that verse really makes sense. And then we can start interpreting the things that happen in our lives through that lens, knowing that God's going to use that as fuel for his purpose. No matter good, bad, or ugly, no matter what it is, he'll work it together for good. And something else that verse is not saying is it's not saying that God is causing all things. So I just want to address that real quick because I know that there's a lot of people that have this kind of warped idea of the sovereignty of God, and they take it to mean that God is making everything happen, that he's up there pressing buttons, pulling strings, and just causing all things to happen. Now, listen carefully to what that verse is saying. It's not saying God causes all things, and it's not saying that all things that happen are good. We're in this fallen world. It's saying that God causes all things to work together for good. So he's working it all for this purpose of conforming us to his image. This passage is not a magic wand that just magically makes everything good. No, he's working it all for good. And I'm going to give you a good example of this in the Bible, and that's in the life of Joseph. The life of Joseph is such a powerful passage. It's such a powerful story, and it foreshadows Christ probably maybe more than any other story in the Old Testament, in my view. And if you remember, you know the story of Joseph, so I won't get into it. When he reconciles with his brothers, after he was betrayed, sold into slavery, went to prison, and then he ends up, at the top, right next to Pharaoh, which is a picture of Jesus at the right hand of God, by the way. When he sees his brothers, he says this, and this is exactly what Romans 8:28 is saying. He says to his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." God meant it for good. And now it's not saying that God caused his brothers to throw him into a pit and sell him into slavery and then caused the brothers to then lie to the parents. God is incapable of that kind of thing. He doesn't do that. That's not in his nature. But what it's saying is God was working everything that happened to Joseph toward his purpose, that purpose of conforming him to his image. And in fact, it's in the Psalms. I believe it's Psalm 105, it says that the word of the Lord tested Joseph until it came to pass in the land of Egypt. And that word tested, what it means is refined. So that word was refining Joseph. In other words, it was causing everything in Joseph to align with God's purpose of conforming him to his image. And that's what God does with us. He takes everything that happens and he uses it as a tool to conform us to his image. Again, I'm not saying God causes those things. I'm saying God is so good at what he does and he's so wise that he can work with anything. Right? No matter what hand you're dealt with, so to speak, in life, if you put it in God's hand, it becomes a winning hand, is what I heard someone say. And see, when everything in us is loving God and serving his purpose, then everything that happens to us can only serve us because we're aligned with that purpose, right? I'm going to say that again. When everything in us is going towards God's purpose and is serving that purpose of becoming like him, then everything that happens around us can only serve that purpose. I think that that's so cool. And so I think that's good for now. And when I say serve, I'm not talking about just doing works for God. I'm talking about giving ourselves to that purpose of becoming like him. Okay, so thank you very much. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.